Section 3 in Part B of the Colregs describes conduct of vessels in restricted visibility, and it just contains rule number 19. Now, visibility is restricted and you have to deal with ships that are out of sight. You cannot see them visually. This means that rule 19 applies. And it also means that rules 11 to 18 do not apply, sort of. As we'll see, the provisions in these rules are often relevant, but the rules themselves do not apply in reduced visibility. Rule 19 applies to vessels that are not in sight of one another when navigating in or near an area of restricted visibility. And this means that Rule 19 applies when visibility is reduced and you cannot see the other vessel. Every vessel shall proceed at a safe speed adapted to the prevailing circumstances and conditions of restricted maneuverability. A power-driven vessel shall have engines ready for immediate maneuver. Now this means, of course, that you need to have a safe speed with reference to Rule 6. It doesn't mean that you have to reduce your speed just because visibility is reduced, but it means that you have to consider reducing your speed. And it does mean that you should have engines ready for maneuvering. Every vessel shall have due regard to the prevailing circumstances and conditions of restricted availability when complying with the rules of Section 1. So you should take into account that there is reduced visibility, obviously. A vessel which detects by radar alone the presence of another vessel shall determine if a close quarter situation is developing and or risk of collision exists. If so, you should take avoiding action in ample time, and if that action consists of alteration of course, you should avoid a couple of things, and we're going to have a closer look at those. First, you should avoid an alteration of course to port for a vessel forward of the beam other than for a vessel being overtaken. Now, if you're changing course to avoid collision, do not turn to port for a vessel in front of you, except if you're overtaking. If you're overtaking the other vessel, you can turn either to starboard or to port as the circumstances permit. In other words, turn to starboard, except when it's overtaking, then you can turn all the way. Second point, an alteration of course towards a vessel abeam or above the beam should be avoided. In other words, do not turn towards a vessel that's after your beam, which is also super logical. You do not want to do that because it would mean crashing with it. Except when it has been determined that a risk of collision does not exist. If you just hear another vessel apparently forward of the beam, if you don't have it on the radar, you just hear it, then you should reduce your speed and if necessary stop. And in any case, navigate with extreme caution until danger of collision is over. So if you're just hearing a vessel and it's apparently in front of you, reduce speed, stop. If you're unsure, reduce the speed, if necessary stop. Some more examples. In reduced visibility, everyone has a duty to give way. If we notice that Rule 19 doesn't say that one or the other vessel should give way, this means that everybody has a duty to give way. And Rule 19 describes two maneuvers that you shouldn't do. Now, if you look closely at it, which we will, you will see that you often end up doing the same maneuver that you would have been doing in good visibility, but you would do it with bigger safety margins. Now, we are the green vessel and we see the other vessels on the radar. And what do we do? And okay, the two things that are described that we shouldn't do is changing the course to port for a vessel in front of beam, except if it's being overtaken. So, an example. Red vessel, we see it on our starboard side. What should we do? Well, we shouldn't change course to port, which means that we should either slow down or turn to starboard, which is the same thing that we would have done in good visibility. A vessel that we're overtaking in this case, if we by radar can determine that we are overtaking the other vessel, we can turn and pass it on either its starboard side or its port side as the circumstances permit, which is the same that we would be doing in good visibility. Okay, and this one is a bit more tricky because we have a vessel on our port side. Now, we should not turn to port in this case. We should, if anything, reduce speed or turn to starboard. In this case, you would probably want to wait a little bit longer because you would expect the other vessels to either slow down or adjust its course to starboard to pass astern of us. So this doesn't mean that we can maintain course and speed. We have to be aware that the responsibilities are different, but in this case we would expect the other vessel to make an early maneuver. If it doesn't, slow down or turn to starboard, maybe do a 360-degree turn. Now we have this case here. We have a vessel on our side or just abaft our beam. We do not turn against it. Very, very logical. So as we've seen, the responsibilities in good visibility would be slightly different, but the maneuver that we end up doing is often the same, except that in reduced visibility we would have bigger safety margin, bigger passing distance. So to summarize part B of the steering and sailing rules, that section 1, they apply in any conditions of visibility, rules 4 to 10. In good visibility, when vessels are in sight of one another, then section 2 applies, rules 11 to 18. Whereas in reduced visibility, section 3, rule 19 applies. We cannot say that section 2 and section 3 apply at the same time. They just don't. But the provisions in section 2, the descriptions of what kind of maneuvers you should do, will very often be relevant. But remember, in reduced visibility, everyone has a duty to give way.